Most focus techniques don't fail because people are lazy. They fail because they target the mind while ignoring the state the mind is operating in. Focus is not a skill you force. It's a byproduct of regulation. And when regulation is missing, no technique lasts. Here's why. Most advice around focus is built on the assumption that attention is a conscious decision. That if you just choose better habits, block distractions, wake up earlier, use the right app, your focus will improve. But attention doesn't originate in willpower. It originates in the nervous system. If your system is overstimulated, under-recovered, or chronically activated, your brain is not in a state that supports sustained attention. So what happens? You try productivity hacks. They work, briefly, then your focus collapses again. Not because the technique stopped working, but because it never addressed the underlying state. Focus techniques assume a regulated baseline. Most people don't have one. When the nervous system is dysregulated, the brain prioritizes scanning, urgency, and threat detection. That's not a flaw, that's survival biology. In that state, deep focus feels unnatural, stillness feels uncomfortable, and sustained effort feels exhausting. So the brain looks for stimulation instead. That's why people jump tasks. That's why they check their phone without realizing it. That's why they confuse busyness with productivity. No app fixes that. No planner fixes that. And no amount of motivation overrides a system that's running in constant activation. This is where most advice gets it wrong. It treats focus as a mental behavior problem, when it's actually a physiological regulation problem. When the nervous system is regulated, focus emerges naturally. You don't try to concentrate. Your attention stabilizes on its own. Time distortion happens. Mental noise quiets. Decisions require less effort. This is the state high performers protect, not because they're disciplined, but because their system is trained to return to baseline efficiently. Most people never train that. They stack techniques on top of dysregulation and wonder why nothing sticks. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If focus feels hard all the time, that's not a character flaw. It's feedback. Your system is telling you it's not in a state that supports precision, depth, or sustained attention. Once you understand that, the solution changes. You stop chasing hacks, you stop forcing output, and you start training regulation. Because regulation is what makes focus durable. Not motivation, not discipline, not optimization. Regulation. When your baseline is stable, focus becomes repeatable. Not perfect, but reliable. And that's the difference between temporary productivity and long-term cognitive control. This is what Regul8 is built around. Not pushing harder, not doing more, but restoring the state that allows focus to happen without force. Because focus doesn't come from effort, it comes from regulation. If you want, next I can, strip this into a 45-second short-form version. Rewrite it as a pure AI robot narration. Add light scientific references without breaking flow. Turn this into episode 3 of a Regul8 Authority series. Build the next video that logically follows this one. Tell me how you want to deploy it. Now write, why motivation comes after regulation, not before. And be sure regulation is clearly even. Sometimes AI audio to video thinks it's about politics. Core positioning inverts mainstream advice. Evergreen value explains burnout cycles clearly. Below is a 5-minute evergreen script written with clear physiological language, so it cannot be misread as political or ideological by audio to video systems. Regulation is explicitly defined as nervous system and physiological state regulation throughout. Tone, calm authority, contrarian, precise. Built for AI narration, voiceover, or on-camera delivery. Why motivation comes after regulation, not before. Most advice tells you to get motivated first, then act, but that order is backward. Motivation does not create action. Physiological regulation creates motivation. When people say they lack motivation, what they're usually experiencing is a dysregulated nervous system. That matters because motivation is not a personality trait. It is a state-dependent response produced by the brain and body working together. When the nervous system is chronically stressed, overstimulated, or under-recovered, the brain shifts into conservation mode. In that state, motivation is suppressed on purpose. Not because something is wrong, but because the body is protecting energy. This is where burnout begins. Burnout is not caused by laziness or lack of ambition. It is caused by long-term activation without adequate physiological regulation. And no amount of mindset work fixes that. Here's the critical distinction most advice ignores. Motivation is not the engine. It is the indicator light. When regulation is present, motivation rises naturally. When regulation is absent, motivation disappears, no matter how badly you want results. That's why people can feel inspired one day and completely depleted the next. Their goals didn't change, their nervous system state did. Mainstream advice tells you to push through this, to discipline yourself, to force consistency. But forcing output from a dysregulated system increases stress load, which further suppresses motivation. That's the burnout loop. Effort, fatigue, guilt, more effort, collapse. The problem was never effort. The problem was state mismanagement. Physiological regulation means the nervous system can return to baseline after activation. Heart rate settles. Breathing normalizes. Cognitive bandwidth restores. In that state, the brain reopens access to drive, curiosity, and engagement. That's motivation. Notice the order: regulation first, motivation second. Action follows naturally. This is why people sometimes feel motivated after rest, movement, or calm focus, even without changing their goals. Their system stabilized. High performers don't rely on motivation. They rely on regulated states that make motivation unnecessary. They act because the system is ready, not because they force themselves. This is also why waiting for motivation fails. You can't think your way into motivation if your nervous system is signaling overload, but you can regulate your way into it. Once regulation is trained, motivation becomes predictable instead of fragile. Not constant, but accessible. That's the difference between sustainable performance and cycles of burnout and recovery. This is what Regul8 is built on. Not hype, not pressure, not forcing behavior, but training the physiological conditions that allow motivation to emerge on its own. Because motivation doesn't come first, regulation does.